All right, today we've got a really fascinating, kind of counterintuitive story for you, all from Russian history. It's this wild tale about a czar who's trying to drag his empire into the modern world, a huge social reform that just completely blows up in his face, and this protest paradox that ends up paving the road to revolution. So yeah, let's dive right in. Okay, so let's kick things off with a question. And honestly, it seems like it should have a really obvious answer. When people protest, when they rise up and demand change, do they get more political power? I mean, you'd think so, right? That's kind of the whole point. Well, here's the twist. In the story we're going to unravel today, the answer is a big, fat no. Actually, it's the complete opposite. In Tsarist Russia, the more people protested, the less of a voice they got. And wrapping your head around that paradox, that is the key to figuring out why the whole Tsarist system eventually came crashing down. All right, to really get this, we need to rewind the clock. We're going back to the mid-1800s. Now, on the surface, the Russian Empire is this massive, powerful beast. But underneath, it's all built on a foundation that's starting to crumble. And a really humiliating military defeat is about to shine a giant spotlight on every single crack. So what kicks everything off? Well, as it so often does in Russian history, it was getting beaten in a war. They got absolutely hammered in the Crimean War, and suddenly it was impossible to ignore just how far behind they were. I mean, you've got Western Europe industrializing, building factories, moving forward, and Russia, it's still stuck in this almost medieval system of serfdom. The humiliation was just massive. And this quote right here from the new Tsar, Alexander II, it tells you everything you need to know about his motivation. And listen, it's not what you might think. He wasn't some great liberal with a bleeding heart. No, he was a hardcore realist. He could see the writing on the wall. The whole system was a powder keg. For him, the choice wasn't, should we reform or not? It was, do we control the change from the top, or do we wait for a bloody revolution to tear everything apart from the bottom? And just like that, the era of the Great Reforms kicks off. The big one, the absolute headliner, was freeing the serfs in 1861. But it was way more than just that. He was trying to modernize the whole shebang, creating local governments called zemstva, easing up on censorship, even, and this was huge, letting women into university. For a minute there, it really looked like a brand new day for Russia. But, there's a but coming, right? Let's zoom in on that main event, freeing the serfs. Because the devil, as they say, is in the details. And how this whole thing was put together, well, that's where our story takes a turn. It promised freedom, sure, but what the people got was something else entirely. So you look at the official announcement, and it's dripping with this super flowery, benevolent language. The Tsar paints himself as this loving father figure, giving this incredible gift to his loyal subjects. It's all about his imperial solicitude and affection. But as the peasants were about to find out, that affection had a very, very high price tag. I mean, on paper, this was a game changer. Suddenly, you're not a serf anymore. You're legally free. You can own your own land, marry who you want without asking permission, start a business, even take someone to court. Think about that. These are basic human rights that their parents and grandparents could only dream of. Okay, so here's the catch. And it is a huge catch. The nobles, the guys who actually wrote the fine print, made sure they didn't lose out. So they kept the best land for themselves, like 2/3 of it. The peasants got the scraps. And for those scraps, they had to pay redemption payments for, get this, 49 years. It was basically a crippling mortgage that their kids and grandkids would still be paying off. And that whole freedom to move, yeah, not so much. Now they were tied to the village commune, the mir, whose main job was to make sure everyone paid up. So did this great freedom calm things down in the countryside? Nope. It was like throwing gasoline on a fire. The peasants felt totally betrayed. They were broke, they were stuck, and they were angry. So they protested. The one reform that was supposed to stop a revolution was now sparking riots all across the empire. The irony is just staggering. So what do you do if you're the czar? You've got all this unrest. Do you listen? Offer a better deal? Nope, not even close. And this is where that paradox we talked about really comes into play. The government takes another one of its supposed great reforms, these new local assemblies, and turns it into a weapon. And check this out. Modern historians have crunched the numbers from back then, and what they found is just wild. This quote sums it up perfectly. In districts where peasants were protesting the most, the government gave them fewer seats in the local assemblies. This wasn't an accident. It was a cold, calculated move to shut them up. The whole system was rigged from day one. See, voting for these zemstva was based on how much land you owned, so of course, the nobility had all the power. But the state didn't stop there. In the areas with the most protests, they literally went in and manipulated the numbers to make sure the peasants' votes counted for even less. So representation wasn't about giving people a voice. It was a tool to keep them quiet.
So the government's playbook is pretty clear by now, right? Give the appearance of change, but crush any real dissent. Well, let's fast forward a few decades. It's 1905. Let's see how that strategy is holding up.
Just look at what these people were asking for. A huge crowd of workers marched to the Winter Palace. Were they demanding to overthrow the government? No. They wanted an 8-hour workday. They wanted trade unions, free medical care, an end to a pointless, disastrous war with Japan. These are not the demands of crazy revolutionaries. They were desperate people, and they came peacefully. They were literally carrying religious icons and pictures of the Tsar, singing hymns. They still believed he was their little father who would help them.
And a reporter from the London Times was there, and he described the scene. He said it was this perfect, beautiful winter day. The air was crisp, the sky was clear, and you just have thousands of people, men, women, and even children, walking with hope in their hearts.
The Tsar wasn't even there. He was out of town, but his orders were crystal clear. Treat them like rebels. And that just says it all about the mindset of this regime. A peaceful crowd asking for help, their only answer was brute force. Soldiers with machine guns opened fire on these unarmed people. An eyewitness said the snow turned red with blood.
And then comes the cover-up. The government's official report, only 96 people were killed. But journalists who were actually there, they started putting together lists of names. Their count, over 4,600 people killed or wounded. The gap between the official story and the truth on the ground, it's just mind-blowing.
That day became known as Bloody Sunday, and it was more than just a massacre. It completely shattered this sacred, centuries-old idea that the Tsar was the protector of the people. By choosing violence over listening, the regime had accidentally created the very thing it had spent decades trying to prevent, a genuine, widespread revolutionary movement. And in that environment of anger and betrayal, radical groups suddenly started to make a lot of sense to a lot of people. You have groups like the RSDLP, that's the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party. They were Marxists, and their whole deal wasn't about asking for reforms. No, their goal was to tear the entire Tsarist system down. And even these guys couldn't agree on how to do it. The party split into two factions. You had the Mensheviks, who wanted a big, broad party open to lots of people. But then you had the other group, the Bolsheviks. Their leader, a guy named Vladimir Lenin, had a totally different idea. He wanted a small, super organized, super disciplined corps of professional revolutionaries. And, well, that approach would eventually prove to be extremely effective. That split would literally change the course of world history. So when you boil it all down, what's the big takeaway? The Tsar's biggest enemy wasn't the protesters, it wasn't the workers, it was the Tsarist system itself. By refusing to actually share any power, by using reform as just another way to control people, and by meeting peaceful pleas with machine guns, the regime basically wrote its own death warrant. It created the very people who would eventually destroy it. And that leaves us with one last big question to think about. I mean, sure, this all happened in Russia over 100 years ago, but the basic problem is timeless, isn't it? When a government can't or won't actually reform itself, and its only answer to protest is violence, what happens then? Is a revolution the only possible outcome? Is it inevitable?